Tonight, we're asking a question that could define the future of the Middle East and possibly shake the global economy in the process. If there is a direct strike on Iran, does the region slide into full-scale war? Or is this another moment of brinkmanship that stops just short of catastrophe? Because here's the reality. This is not a simple one-on-one confrontation. This is not a contained battlefield. Iran is not isolated, and the Middle East is not a vacuum. Every move here triggers reactions: political, military, economic, and those reactions don't stay neatly inside borders. In recent days, Gulf nations have issued unusually direct warnings. The message is clear. If Iran is attacked, the conflict may not remain limited. It could spread rapidly, unpredictably, and once that door opens, closing it becomes far more complicated than opening it. To understand why this matters, we need to step back. Iran is not just a nation-state with conventional armed forces. Over the last 4 decades, it has built what many analysts call a networked deterrence strategy. Instead of relying only on tanks and fighter jets, Tehran invested in relationships, influence, and proxy forces across the region. That network now stretches from Lebanon to Iraq, from Syria to Yemen. At the center of that network sits Hezbollah in Lebanon. This is not a small militia group operating in the shadows. It is heavily armed, battle-tested from years of conflict in Syria, and positioned directly on Israel's northern border. Any direct attack on Iran raises an immediate question. Does Hezbollah activate? And if it does the Northern Front ignite overnight? Then there's Hamas in Gaza. While its relationship with Tehran has had ups and downs over the years, Iran has historically provided support, funding, and weapons. A strike on Iranian soil could trigger coordinated escalation, not necessarily centrally commanded, but strategically aligned. Beyond those two, there are powerful Shia militias inside Iraq, groups that operate under different banners, some integrated into Iraqi security structures, others more autonomous. These militias have previously targeted U.S. bases and diplomatic facilities in response to regional tensions. If Iran is attacked, American forces in Iraq could suddenly find themselves under renewed pressure. So when Gulf countries warn about regional spillover, they're not speculating. They're looking at a map, they're looking at alliances, and they're calculating reaction chains. Now let's talk geography, because geography may decide everything. Roughly 20% of the world's oil supply passes through the Strait of Hormuz. It is one of the most strategically vital waterways on the planet. Iran sits on one side of it, Oman on the other. It is narrow, highly monitored, militarized. Iran has repeatedly signaled that if it faces an existential threat, it could disrupt shipping traffic in that corridor. Not necessarily close it permanently, but even limited disruption would send oil prices soaring. Insurance premiums would spike. Global markets would react instantly. And here's the key point. You don't need a prolonged closure to cause economic shock. Even the perception of instability in Hormuz can move energy markets within hours. For American viewers, that means gas prices, inflation, supply chain ripple effects. This is why countries like Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates are walking a careful line. Publicly, they emphasize stability. Privately, they are calculating risk exposure. Saudi Arabia has spent years trying to stabilize its own relationship with Tehran. After decades of rivalry, there have been cautious diplomatic openings. Riyadh does not want its oil infrastructure, again, becoming a target. Remember, Saudi oil facilities have been attacked before in regional proxy conflicts. The economic damage was immediate. The United Arab Emirates, meanwhile, has positioned itself as a regional business hub. Dubai thrives on stability, trade, and investor confidence. A full-blown regional war would shake that foundation. So here's the dilemma for Gulf states. They share security partnerships with the United States, but they also share geography with Iran, and geography is permanent. Let's widen the lens even further. Israel views Iran's nuclear ambitions as an existential threat. That's not rhetorical language. It is a strategic doctrine. Israeli leaders across party lines have consistently argued that they cannot allow Tehran to reach a nuclear weapons capability threshold. On the other side, Iranian leadership frames its missile and nuclear programs as defensive deterrence. From Tehran's perspective, it is surrounded by U.S. military bases, hostile governments, and sanctions regimes. Enter the United States. Washington maintains a military presence across the Gulf. Aircraft carriers patrol nearby waters. Air bases operate in Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait. If Iran is struck, whether directly by Israel or through joint coordination, American assets inevitably become part of the equation. And here's where things become extremely sensitive. Even if Washington does not initiate the strike, retaliation against U.S. forces could occur. Proxy groups may not distinguish between direct and indirect involvement. That creates escalation pressure. The U.S. responds to protect its forces. Iran responds to defend its sovereignty. And suddenly the conflict is no longer regional, it is international. This is what analysts call multi-front escalation. Imagine this scenario. A strike hits Iranian facilities. Within hours, Hezbollah launches rockets from southern Lebanon. Militias in Iraq begin targeting U.S. bases. Shipping incidents occur in the Strait of Hormuz. Cyber attacks disrupt financial systems. Oil prices jump. Global markets plunge. None of these actions alone equals world war, but together they form a web of simultaneous crises that feed each other. And here's the psychological factor. Once blood is spilled, political leaders face domestic pressure. No government wants to appear weak, especially in the Middle East, where deterrence credibility matters. Iranian leadership cannot be seen as passive after an attack on its territory. Israeli leadership cannot ignore rocket fire. American leadership cannot ignore attacks on its troops. Saudi leadership cannot allow infrastructure damage without response. This is how conflicts widen, not always by design, but by accumulated reaction. Now let's address a crucial question. Would all of Iran's proxy network automatically activate? Not necessarily. Proxy groups have their own calculations. Hezbollah must weigh Lebanon's fragile economic state. Iraq's militias must consider internal Iraqi politics. Hamas operates within the constraints of Gaza's humanitarian situation. But coordination does not require identical timing. It requires shared strategic interest. And Iran's strategy has long relied on layered deterrence, the idea that attacking Tehran carries costs beyond Tehran itself. That's the core reason Gulf countries are worried. Because if the battlefield expands, it won't expand in one direction. It expands in multiple directions simultaneously. Energy markets, shipping lanes, border regions, urban centers. Now let's talk about timing. Regional tensions tend to spike during moments of political transition. Elections, leadership changes, shifting alliances. In those moments, red lines blur. Messages get misinterpreted. Signals become mixed. If a strike occurs during such a period, the margin for miscalculation shrinks dramatically, and miscalculation is often the true spark of larger wars. History shows us that major conflicts sometimes begin not with a grand strategy, but with a series of escalatory steps that leaders believe are controlled until they're not. The Middle East today is heavily armed. Missile technology is more precise. Drone warfare is more accessible. Cyber capabilities are more advanced than ever before. That means a future conflict would not look like traditional tank columns crossing deserts. It would be fast, multi-domain, hybrid, missiles from Lebanon, drones from Yemen, cyber disruptions targeting infrastructure, naval maneuvers in Hormuz, air defense systems lighting up skies, and all of it unfolding under the glare of real-time global media. So when we ask, would an attack on Iran trigger full-scale war? We're really asking something deeper. Are the deterrence mechanisms strong enough to contain escalation? Because deterrence in this region works both ways. Iran signals consequences to prevent attack. Israel signals willingness to strike to prevent nuclear development. The United States signals force to protect allies. Gulf states signal caution to prevent economic disaster. It is a balance, tense, fragile, constantly shifting. Right now, that balance feels thinner than usual. Diplomatic channels exist, but trust is limited. Military posturing increases risk perception. Public rhetoric raises stakes. And here's something often overlooked. Regional actors may not want total war, but they may believe limited confrontation strengthens their bargaining position. That's a dangerous mindset. Limited wars have a history of becoming less limited over time. So the Gulf warning is not dramatic exaggeration. It is strategic realism. If Iran is hit, the reaction may not be symmetrical. It may be layered, distributed, indirect, but powerful enough to destabilize the entire region. Energy markets would react first, financial markets next. Political alliances would be tested. and ordinary civilians in Tel Aviv, in Beirut, in Riyadh, in Tehran would feel the consequences almost immediately. This is not about a single airstrike. It's about interconnected systems, military systems, economic systems, alliance systems. Pull one thread, and the fabric tightens everywhere. Right now, decision makers in Washington, Jerusalem, Tehran, Riyadh, and Abu Dhabi are all calculating the same question. What is the cost of action, and what is the cost of restraint? Because sometimes restraint carries political cost, and sometimes action carries strategic catastrophe. The Middle East has seen wars before, but today's environment is more interconnected than ever. And that is why the warning from Gulf states matters. It is not just diplomacy. It is a signal that the region understands how quickly events could spiral. The question is not whether tensions exist. The question is whether the next move crosses a line that cannot be uncrossed. Let's go deeper. To understand what might unfold if Iran is attacked, we need to look behind the headlines, beyond the rockets and missiles, and into the invisible chessboard where power moves quietly, often unnoticed by the public. This is where the real dynamics of the Middle East lie. In alliances, in proxy networks, in economic levers, and in psychological signaling. At the top layer, you see Iran, Israel, the United States, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. But below that, there's a lattice of relationships that shape every potential action. Hezbollah is not just a Lebanese militia. It is a political force within Lebanon with international connections. It has influence over ports, banking networks, and local governance. That means a military decision in Beirut or southern Lebanon is also a political and economic calculation. Any strike on Iran would force Hezbollah's leadership to weigh domestic repercussions, foreign expectations, and their alignment with Tehran simultaneously. That is a level of complexity that makes escalation unpredictable. Similarly, Iraqi militias are embedded in the Iraqi government and military structure. Some are aligned with Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, but they also have local constituencies and internal rivalries. That means a provocation doesn't just translate into direct attacks on U.S. targets. It could also trigger intra-Iraqi power struggles, political assassinations, and even civil unrest that might not immediately hit the news outside Baghdad. Then there is Hamas. While geographically distant, it is strategically significant. Gaza is tightly controlled and resources are limited, yet Tehran has cultivated influence there for years. In a scenario where Iran is attacked, Hamas could coordinate missile launches or cyber attacks, not necessarily through direct orders, but through shared objectives, sending the signal that an attack on Tehran has consequences elsewhere. This makes the conflict multidimensional. Land, sea, air, cyber, and economic pressures all converging. The Strait of Hormuz remains the ultimate pressure point. Iran's ability to threaten shipping lanes is a lever that affects not just the Middle East, but the global economy. Tankers carrying crude oil are the lifelines of energy-dependent nations. Even a temporary blockade or threat of attack sends oil prices skyrocketing. Markets don't wait for clarity. Perception drives panic, and panic drives tangible consequences in the form of higher fuel prices, shipping disruptions, and inflation. For ordinary people in New York, London, or Tokyo, this is not abstract geopolitics. This translates directly into cost of living, energy bills, and the stability of financial systems. But let's step behind the curtain further. Decision-making in Tehran, Riyadh, and Washington is not only about military capability. It is about signaling credibility, managing domestic politics, and projecting strength without triggering uncontrollable escalation. Leaders calculate not only the response of their adversaries, but also the perception of their allies and populations. Iran cannot appear weak in front of its regional proxies. Saudi Arabia cannot appear vulnerable to attacks on its oil infrastructure. Washington cannot appear indecisive regarding the protection of its forces or allies. Every move is a message, and every message is a potential trigger. Now, let's imagine three possible futures. Scenario one, limited deterrence holds an attack occurs, perhaps targeting a single Iranian facility, and Tehran responds with calibrated missile strikes against non-critical targets in neighboring countries. Proxy networks remain largely inactive. The Gulf states maintain their defensive posture, energy markets spike temporarily, and diplomatic channels reopen under high tension. This is the narrowly controlled scenario where escalation is paused by a combination of fear, restraint, and signaling credibility. Scenario 2, multi-front regional escalation. Hezbollah launches rockets into northern Israel, Iraqi militias target U.S. bases, and cyber attacks hit Gulf infrastructure. The Strait of Hormuz sees sporadic incidents with oil tankers. Civilian populations in major cities are exposed to the chaos, forcing governments to respond publicly. Energy markets experience prolonged volatility. Here, the conflict is regional but not yet global. The risk of miscalculation is high, and every action reverberates across multiple borders. Diplomatic channels exist but are fragile. Scenario 3, spiral into wider confrontation. The initial attack triggers a cascade. Iran mobilizes multiple fronts. Proxy networks across Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, and Yemen coordinate attacks, and Israel escalates further to prevent Hezbollah consolidation. The U.S. responds with military action to protect forces and allies. Oil supplies are disrupted for weeks. Civilian populations across the region face humanitarian crises. This scenario could potentially draw in powers outside the Middle East indirectly through economic, military, and political involvement and become a prolonged, unpredictable conflict. So what does this mean for ordinary people? Urban populations in Beirut, Baghdad, Gaza, Tehran, and Riyadh are at immediate risk. Civilian infrastructure, hospitals, schools, and water supplies are vulnerable. Economies are disrupted, businesses shutter, and food prices soar. Beyond the Middle East, energy-dependent countries face inflation, supply chain bottlenecks, and market instability. The human cost is tangible, even before conventional battles expand. And yet, every actor, Iran, Israel, the U.S., Gulf states, operates under the calculus of controlled escalation. None desire total war, but each believes in demonstrating strength. History repeatedly shows that misjudgment of this balance is what often ignites larger conflicts. The question is whether leaders have the information, discipline, and incentive to restrain themselves when each move is observed, interpreted, and responded to by multiple actors simultaneously. Here's the critical takeaway. The next move matters immensely. It is not just a tactical strike. It is a test of deterrence, credibility, and regional stability. The systems, military, political, economic, are interconnected. Actions reverberate far beyond the immediate battlefield. And in this environment, a single miscalculation can cascade into widespread crisis. So tonight, as we watch warnings from Gulf states and statements from Tehran, we are witnessing more than diplomacy. We are witnessing a high-stakes game where every decision, every signal, and every response could define the trajectory of the Middle East and the world for years to come. The question remains, if Iran is attacked, can restraint truly hold, or are we standing at the threshold of a conflict that no one can fully control? This is the question that policymakers, analysts, and ordinary citizens alike must confront.